Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the October 24th meeting of the Infrastructure Oversight Board meeting. If you could please join us and stand for a flag salute. We'll do it jointly. Please follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, and again, welcome to members of the public as well as staff who take their time to come here after hours. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Armin Avazian,
Here.
Walter Brennan Jr.,
Here.
Maria Coronado, present. Greg Jackson,
Present.
Vanessa Rachal,
Here.
Tamala Takahashi,
Here.
Jeff Vanderboord.
Present. Thank you. Following our agenda format, we have announcements.
So I did want to let everyone know that we are going through, for the first time ever, a new budget process. And our target to bring forward the city manager's draft CIP or capital improvement program budget would be the January, possibly the February deadline or meeting date. And so we're working through it with all of the departments. The city manager will get the final draft approved, and then we will bring that forward to present to the board.
Thank you. Any questions on that announcement? If there are none, then our agenda takes us to the oral communications portion of the agenda, during which any person who wishes to address the board may do so both on our agenda, on any other business related to the Infrastructure Oversight Board. We have one request to address the board, and it's from Mr. Brian Snodgrass. I'll repeat your name, Mr. Brian Snodgrass. I wasn't pointing to the microphone, so we may have lost that information.
You don't have to repeat it.
Thank you.
Thank you, though. Hello, everyone. I want to introduce myself to this wonderfully newly formed board. My name is Brian Snodgrass, and I'm the chair of the Library Board of Trustees. I want to take a moment, though, to talk to you specifically about the Central Library. The Central Library serves more than 300,000 people per year on site. Stated differently, each resident, on average, uses this one library location about 3 times each year. However, along with the general deterioration of the facility, the current Central Library does not meet the highest level of standards for accessibility. It lacks basic amenities like study spaces or ample outlets for users to plug in laptops, cannot support the library's growing role in digital literacy, and suffers from basic issues like poor plumbing and inefficient air control, resulting in environmental waste and higher maintenance costs. In fact, the city first identified the need for updates to modernize the Central Library back in 1989, 30 years ago. Along with the city, the residents have signaled that a modern library is a priority. Voters in 2003 approved bonds to fund a replacement library by a margin of 67.9%. And yet the Central Library remains the same. A modern Central Library can do so much more. It would help maintain a healthy local economy by providing space and resources for people learning or improving skills, starting a business, meeting with small or large groups, and taking online classes. A replacement library would provide access to the technology and training that residents need to help Burbank continue to thrive, and it would support educational success through the lifespan by providing children and adults lifelong educational opportunities. The Library Board of Trustees is here to support your work on this board, and we look forward to working with you guys in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Snodgrass. Appreciate very much you taking the time to come and address us, and we look forward to working with you as the library is part of the infrastructure of our city, very clearly. Any comments or response from any board members? Again, thank you. that brings us to the approval of the minutes. And before we act on them, may I just do a very quick question of the board members? We've received these minutes. I think this is the second set of minutes, and just was wondering if everyone is satisfied with the level of detail that there are. They're certainly very specific as to what happened, what transpired, who made a motion and who seconded, but there's not an awful lot of information on our internal discussion. Maybe we're not ready for prime time yet to record our discussion, but I think I wanted to ask and see if we can give staff some direction without burdening them unnecessarily with too much. What is the general census, Mr. Jackson?
I share those concerns. I discussed this issue before the meeting started with staff. I mean, it's very skeletal, which they're providing at this point. Yes, it says we took an action and voted yes or nay, and my colleague requested a certain type of reports be included. But I would like to see more narrative as we go down and deal with substantive matters. I mean, I may have different opinions than my colleagues have, but I want it to be documented. I want to be on record. I'm not supporting the agendas the meeting minutes as they're presently constructed.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes, Mr. Brennan?
Oh, good deal. I agree with Mr. Jackson. When we have like a discussion on any particular subject, whatever it is, and there's going to be a lot of subjects discussed from now on out, it should be in the minutes, or at least a brief comment about our discussions and who said what and who has an opinion on what, whatever it is.
Okay. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. Any other thoughts from other board members? Go ahead, please, Ms. Takahashi.
Up to this point, we've been mainly asking questions, I think, and getting more information. So I think that definitely when we get into decision-making or having opinions, that definitely, I feel, would benefit to be published, although I'm not sure how I feel about the questions asked, because some of them, a lot of them are just clarifying questions. But I do agree that when we have opinions, or if we have deep discussions about issue, those would be beneficial to mention in the minutes.
Thank you. I think hopefully staff has some feedback from us. I mean, having reviewed them, my immediate thought was the same as I shared both with Mr. Jackson, Mr. Brennan, and Ms. Takahashi, that they're very skeletal at this point. And again, they're probably appropriate for what transpired, although we have had a couple of sort of opinions shared by board members that have now been lost to the record of minutes. But I think this is televised, and it's an opportunity for people to refer to the televised meeting. But it is rather large, and if we can serve the council by maybe summarizing a little bit of our discussion, just like a simple one tonight, board requested that minutes be a little more detailed, and Mr. Jackson will not support the minutes. Maybe, I don't know. But that would be a quick summary of this discussion without getting into a lot of the weeds and wasting a lot of time writing. Is that kind of the census that we have from everyone? Thank you. Having said that, this is the time to approve the minutes. Mr. Jackson's comments being considered. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
As submitted, I move that we approve the minutes.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Abasian. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. May we have a roll call on the motion, please?
Armin Avazian,
Yes.
Walter Brennan Jr.,
Yes.
Maria Coronado,
Yes.
Greg Jackson,
No.
Vanessa Rochelle,
Yes.
Tamala Takahashi,
Yes.
and Jeff Vanderboord.
Yes. So the minutes have been approved as submitted, and Mr. Jackson's no vote will be recorded accordingly, and hopefully, again, a little summary of what led us to this, hopefully better understanding of how we would love to get our thoughts transferred into written record. Thank you. That brings us to the examples of pavement conditions.
for the presentation. Good evening. Marnell Gibson, Public Works Department. I'm going to have to ask a favor of all of you tonight to please make sure you speak into your mic because I forgot my hearing aids this morning. So when we get into a discussion, please I may ask what a couple of times. In the last meeting, a question was raised about pavement conditions. And when we presented the pavement management program to the council, actually a few years ago now, we went into a lot of detail about that, about how you arrive at that. There was a question, I believe, that was asked of, can we have an example of what a pavement condition index or a PCI, which we have an average target of 65, would look like, and what is there a street out there that would be representative of that? And we did mention one, but we did not have any photos at the time. I believe Mr. Rinn said a Main Street, and that is actually probably at about a 70. So we thought we would go through a few examples for you. So this is the scale for the pavement condition index, and our average is about a 57 right now. It definitely changes regularly, but that at our last study, that is where we were at. So if you look at a very good, or a PCI of 100, a street that has just been resurfaced, you get an image that looks pretty darn clean. Then you go down to an 80, and you can start to see a little bit of wear and tear, but that street's still in very good condition. And then a PCI of 65, so San Jose from Kenneth to 6th Street is a good indicator of a 65, so a pretty comfortable ride. And another example is Kenneth from Palm to Magnolia. There's another one, Walnut from Sunset to Lockheed View. And Bel Air from Walnut to Delaware. And now what does it look like if it gets into a poor condition? This is about a 46, and you're starting to see a little bit of alligator cracking in the median. And then when you get to a very poor, which is pretty much a failed street, you start seeing pieces come up, and you're starting to lose the structural integrity of your street. So we wanted to show some visuals for you. And if anyone is interested in doing a windshield tour, let us know, and we'll have staff from our office take you out and drive you around and show you the condition of some of the streets and tell you what the PCI is.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, this was a question the board asked for, and this
Yes.
gives us some guidance, Mr. Jackson.
I have a question. Up in my area, which is north of Kenneth, toward the hills, there's been some progress in resurfacing of the streets, and I'd say they're probably in the good to very good categories still, because it's only been a few years. But I'd noticed, I have a lot of time on my hands these days, that pretty much in the center of the road, a lot of these streets are cracking. They haven't cracked elsewhere, but pretty much the center line. What's going on? I mean, these are streets that have been done in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years at most.
So without taking a look at it visually, I'm not going to be able to tell you. But again, if you would like to have,
I'll be glad to. I've offered your staff to take a ride along with my car, which has white tires, and I feel all the road bumps. But it was a Verdugo between Kenneth and Glen Oaks, and a number of the other streets that go toward Glen Oaks that have been resurfaced, but they're already cracking within just a few short years. All right, thank you.
Are any other comments? Yes, Ms. Takahashi.
Thank you for showing us these pictures. These are very helpful. In addition to the visual of, you can see kind of a gut reaction. Oh, I can see that's not as nice of a street as that. What actual metrics do you use to decide if a street is in the different categories? So you mentioned cracks, but is there other metrics? Like how do you? Because just looking at it is more of a subjective. So whatever kind of.
Yes, it
objective-
is. Is Art in here? Do you have the menu of everything that they look at when they're for the categorization?
Just some examples would be fine. We don't need the whole. Just an idea, because when people say, "Oh, my street is a mess" or whatever, it's nice to
Yes.
have something specific to talk about.
And I know they do always contact our office, and we give them what the last measured PCI is, but there could also be degradation. So it can, if there's pieces coming out of it and there's been a lot of water across it, then it can get worse.
So, like looking at the difference between the 100 and the 80 and the 65, what is it? Because it's uneven? Is it because it's rougher? What is it that makes it?
So you're
less-
starting to see a little bit more wear and tear. You might see a little more aggregate showing. You might see some fine hairline cracks. So the deeper the
Okay.
cracks are going, alligator cracking where there's a lot happening. You might see more separation between any concrete interfaces, whether it be a cross gutter or an actual gutter.
Okay.
So you're just seeing a lot more degradation. And it is a rough estimate,
Okay.
certainly.
And then one more question: how many streets? Now that I think we just finished the paving project, right, throughout the city.
We did.
So now, how many streets do we have left that are in very poor condition? Do we have many left?
We
or-
still have a lot. So we're
Yeah.
still the presentation that I gave you that showed how we get to the average of 65. We're still in that deferred maintenance category. So we're going to keep the overall condition, the average condition of our streets is going to keep getting worse until we hit that tipping point in another roughly 5 to 10 years, depending on how much we can attack annually.
Okay, so one last question. If somebody does feel like their street is in the very poor category, what would be the steps that they would take, or how would they would address it, or could they call?
Certainly, they can call, and next, this will be on when we're talking about future agenda items, but one of the things that staff have been working on is changing our approach to the pavement management program. Because it was so severely underfunded, we had a rotational program where we would take 2 areas out of 20 in the city annually, and whatever we could afford, we would resurface the worst streets in those areas, but you wouldn't necessarily get all the streets anyway that were even in bad condition. So we want to change that approach and go after the streets and that are in the worst condition, and then also introduce slurry sealing, which we haven't done for quite a long time. So that's a maintenance effort. But there are different approaches that you can utilize in keeping your streets in good condition by doing maintenance and doing more preventative activities that will get you a better life cycle out of the paving.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Brenner?
Understanding that you probably have no money most of the time to deal with, when you do have money, can we get copies of your specifications for redoing a street in terms of repaving? Because, and I've done them myself, and I'd like to see what you guys do. I mean, I understand, like, if we have any money, we'll just resurface it. That makes sense to me. But when you do have the cash flow, what is your procedure for redoing a street? Or your procedure, can we get a copy of, the specification for doing that?
So the contract documents are always posted online?
No, not contract documents, the specification for the contractor to bid on. Or, whatever the performance specification would be.
So that's
to do
what
it.
that would be. That would be the contract document. So
Okay, great.
it'd be it's the specifications and plans that we
Right.
advertise and then award the
Right.
contract.
Something along those lines there, as opposed to, I understand, like, we're only gonna be able to resurface it, and that's the way it goes until we get more money. But like, when you go right down to bedrock, what's your spec? Or the contract document.
Correct, and that's different for depending on the condition of the street. So it's not very cost effective to have to rebuild your street.
I understand.
And that's what we want to stay away from. But those contract
There's a few
documents.
streets out there that I've seen that, yeah, I probably need it. But I don't
And-
think you have the funds.
Well, it depends on exactly what you mean. So if it's a concrete street, that's a whole different ball of wax. But
sure is, yeah.
but we actually have different design approaches that we utilize depending on the condition of the street. So whether we're just doing the mill and paving or we're actually doing dig outs in areas to reconstruct and get down to your base layer on it. But that's called out per the condition of the street. And that's a public document.
Sure.
It's advertised, and yes, you can definitely have access to that.
Mr. Jackson?
Question. We're talking about streets. What about alleys? About 15 years ago, I received a postcard from the city saying they apologized for the inconvenience, but my alley was going to be, paved or or something. It never happened. I guess it dropped out of the program. I don't use the alley, but some of my neighbors do access their driveways from the alleys. And I don't think the driveways in that area of town have been done in the last 50 years.
So alleys were not considered in that PCI of 65, and that would be something that we would need to discuss further as we move the pavement management program forward.
But they're off the books now.
They are off the books right now.
If we don't have any other comments, then let me, I think, summarize it's clear for this board that pavement conditions are paramount in our infrastructure big picture. It's very clear that infrastructure is incredibly complex and there's so many other components. We totally understand. We get that. Probably one of the most visible aspects of infrastructure that all of us see and our neighbors see, and each one of us has a visceral reaction to, whether it's your alley or your street, is the conditions of the street. We
Right.
drive them, we walk the sidewalks. So it would be probably helpful to bring this back again and again from time to time. Certainly, I just learned that the alleys were not a part of this current 57 PCI. It'd be interesting to understand that and get a sense for costs for alleys, again, because we're going to have to make a recommendation to council on the funding issues and our goals. And I know there's endless demands for the money, but this is one that I also would love to be part of, any kind of a drive along to see a little more and learn a little more. So perhaps it's something we give everyone an opportunity to try to participate if a date is jointly convenient, at least for the majority or for anyone, if that's okay. And then also the issue is the 65 goal realistic when you consider the alleys? And also, am I assuming that a PCI of 57 is arrived at by simply using the square footage of streets throughout the city? And
Yes, it was the average of the conditions of all of the streets,
okay,
yes.
so that's fairly clear. So if we
Right.
have,
Some are really bad, some are doing pretty good, so, but that was the average citywide.
so even, in statistics, averages and means and norms are difficult to understand. I know we, as a city, we have always focused on the larger streets like, Burbank Boulevard, Olive, Magnolia, Victory, and they mean the most, certainly to most people. So it'd be interesting also to understand how that average is arrived at. More. It's one of these subjects that I think will help us to dig in a little deeper. And you already helped us today by bringing us this.
Right.
And it's clear there are a few more questions.
When we come back with the revised pavement management program, we will go through all of that.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much for that. That brings us then to just note and file this for now with the general comments of an expected
Yes.
driving opportunity for
Yes.
board members if it.
Yep, and just
See some-
contact Julie and she'll get it arranged.
All right, how about we do it the other way? How about Julie sends us an email with a couple of choices and then see if we can respond?
Yes, absolutely. And it'll have to be separate ride-alongs. I can probably do a couple just so we can refrain from any violation of Brown Act.
3 maximum participants.
Yes.
Okay,
So I'll reach out to you all.
thank you so much. Tiny cars. That brings us to item number 7 on the agenda, which is
All right.
the phases and life cycle of a capital project.
Yes. Can I have the presentation, please? Sorry, the next one. Oh, I'm sorry. I gotta do it. All right, you go now. Will it? That was my bad, I'm sorry. All right, so another topic that we wanted to go over at a high level is what happens with a project. So kind of what does that look like? And wanted to start out, we put it into three very simple categories of planning, design, and construction. And this is actually the state's report card on infrastructure in totality. And there's a more detailed report that can be found online, and we can send you that link. But this was just to demonstrate that not only locally, but statewide and as well nationwide, infrastructure has a lot of needs. And so the GPA, they run a scorecard, they do a survey with various cities, but for California, we're averaging a C minus, dipping down into the Ds on many categories. So just so that you all understand, we are not alone in this endeavor. And just a reminder, in the past couple of presentations, we spoke to the city of Burbank's existing infrastructure needs, roughly estimated at $470 million, broken down into 4 general categories. So what are the key phases of a project? You're looking at the planning, design, construction. We added in their closeout. In the top graph, you're going to see time. So there can be a considerable amount of time also spent in the planning phase. Sometimes 20 years can be spent in the planning phase, and a project doesn't really become a project at that point. But once it gets going, so once it has an identified and agreed upon scope of work, an identified agreed upon schedule and budget, then we call it a project. And the bottom one, you'll see what is a typical, phase for, for a project, and the expenditure, it's actually an expenditure curve. So you'll see minimal amounts spent in the planning phase, a little more in the design phase, and then your huge cost impact is during the construction phase. This is a very simple schedule example, but we just wanted to show you. So maybe you have a fairly average sized project. You may look at year 1. It will take you a few months to go through that planning phase and identifying your full scope of work. And then you may have permits to pull, the design component to work through. You may have community vetting. And so you're going through year 2 and maybe a little bit even into a 3rd year on that front. And then we demonstrated just an example of perhaps you had like a 1-year construction window. 3 months of that may be taken up because of environmental constraints. So you actually cannot do any construction during that time period because there are environmental restrictions. And then it always does take, once you file your notice of completion for construction and you're officially done with that contract with the contractor, it takes some time to actually close out the full project and do your as-builts and that type of thing. So what is planning? It's the very earliest phase of a project. You could even say a conceptual component is part of that, but you identify a purpose and a need for a project initially. That may be ideas, sketches on a napkin, renderings, that type of thing, but you're kind of cooking an idea. the level of uncertainty is very high. You don't really know how long it's going to take. You don't really know how much it's going to cost. You might have a very rough idea, or if it's kind of a repetitive, more like a programmatic capital, you'll have a better idea of cost and schedule. But it's very early in the game. And you may have done some vetting with the community, maybe not. Maybe this is roundtable discussions amongst departments of a need. And you oftentimes are utilizing minimal resources at that point in time. You may be doing just a feasibility analysis that may be utilizing in-house resources or contracting with a consultant. And so one example of a conceptual level would be the Civic Center Plaza. And so the Community Services Building was constructed over 10 years ago, but at that point in time, this rendering was done where there was an idea of demolishing the Administrative Service Building and then creating a gathering space and kind of developing that block in totality. So that has been around for a long time in a conceptual phase. So what are a few items that are a few methodologies of actually delivering a project? Typically, we utilize a design, bid, build. So that's an end to end to end. So you work through the design under a contract, you advertise and award it to the lowest responsive bidder, and then you construct the contract or the project. A design bid build is where you pair up both the designer and the contractor as a team. So they're working in parallel on that front. It's a different delivery method. We have not done a lot of that, but that's an area that we are going to be exploring. I believe Burbank Water and Power has done more of that. Then there's job order contracting, where you basically shortlist or you have an on-call contractor and you submit tasks to them. It's got minimal amount of design, so it's some of that little more simplistic projects that are quick. And then the public-private partnership, which is being utilized on a number of fronts in which you work on the financing of it, and then typically it's done with a design build contract, and it's typically a very large project. The numbers that we hear is something around 100 million would be an ideal candidate for this type of delivery method. And that's one that has been talked about with potentially a new central library. So then moving into the next phase of design.
I stop your flow, but I just have a question about the planning.
Yeah, I'm sorry, could you use the microphone?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I don't want to stop your flow of your presentation, but I do have a question about the planning phase. Is it essentially work that's done in-house by staff? Because I'm looking at the Exhibit A, which was part of our we provided, and there are some where there's moderate amounts of money. I mean, item 3, which is whatever CSB 10 improvements, they spent almost $118,000 in planning. So is that staff salary, or what is that?
That's a consultant.
That's a consultant. Okay, and then that would be the same for all of Magnolia Bridge modernization, which was about $300,000 in the planning. So that's a consultant.
Consultant work,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Yes.
Now I understand.
We actually do not, at this point in time, capture our staff costs in our estimates, but that is something we are working on.
Okay, thank you very much.
So quickly, just to clarify, the admin costs don't charge against the project.
Correct. Thank you. So looking at design, so this is where we develop the plans, the specifications, and the estimate, oftentimes referred to as PS&E. Looking at a design, bid, build method, which is, I would say, the most traditional method. So we actually, most of the time for our projects, we do consult out. We do some in-house design. So for example, on our paving projects, we do that in-house right now. with the amount of increase that is occurring on that and the demand that's coming to the department, we very well may consider contracting that out to help deliver and stay on schedule with the overall programmatic goals. So typical milestones and review periods hit the 30% mark, 60%, and then final design. And once that's completed, then you're ready to advertise. The project then goes over to our purchasing department, and they advertise an award through that process to the lowest responsive bidder. And we are required by law to award to the lowest responsive bidder. If you look at a consultant contract, that is actually qualifications based, so it's a little bit of a different process. And therefore, when you look at a design build contract, you get a little more of the qualification component to it. So then you get into construction, and we award the project and make sure all the bonds and insurance are in place. And the contractor, we have a pre-construction meeting with the contractor. We issue them the notice to proceed. They provide a schedule. We don't tell them means and methods. That's their job. And that's also to reduce the risk to the city. Once we get into telling them how to do the job, then the city assumes the risk, so we stay out of that portion of it. And there's public outreach that is conducted, especially if there's going to be some significant impacts during the construction process. We have an inspection that occurs to ensure quality assurance, and then we would contract out any special inspection. So if there was geotechnical or any type of specialty, if we happen to have welding involved in it, all of that would be contracted out. We do not do that in-house. Soils testing, that type of thing. So, oops, I'm sorry. Then from that, once the construction is pretty much substantially complete, we generate a punch list to make sure all of the items within the construction, within the contract documents are completed. If not, then the contractor has to go back and do those repairs or fixes or implement what he did not cover. And then we get acceptance. So we look at basically, did they deliver the purpose and need of the project? We file a notice of completion, and then our contract is done with that contractor, except for the 1-year warranty. So that's pretty much a requirement in every one of our contracts, and then our construction phase is complete. Then we move into the closeout process. So then it's also called commissioning, but we transfer it to the asset managing department. So if there is a department that operates and maintains it, then it goes back to them to do that, and then gets back into that life cycle cost. And when a project is needed again, it comes back predominantly to Public Works, but also Community Development Department, Parks and Rec. There are other departments that also deliver projects. We always want to get our owner's manual or our own manuals. And then also something we are working on is doing a lessons learned at the end of projects. So we are continuing to repeat mistakes that may have been made during the contract. So now, go ahead.
Yeah, once again, who does the inspections?
So we have a total of 3 inspectors. For our entire city, they cover all permits in the right-of-way and then any construction in the right-of-way. That's 1 supervisor, 2 inspectors. So anybody above and beyond that, we contract out.
Okay, and then if the capital improvement is a physical structure, does building and safety do the inspections?
Correct. So that would be a combination. So if it's a public facility, we would do the design of it, but it would still go through the plan check process, through the building inspection, and then they would inspect for the code. We would inspect the right-of-way portions as well as the contract documents for the building.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And then we were going to walk, since we like paving, where'd it go? We're going to walk through the most recent paving project. So this is the example of the 20 areas that the city is currently broken into for the paving for the paving program. And this shows 2 areas that are the current phase, and then the next 2 areas that would be in the following year. And that's what it does. It just rotates around the city and covers 2 areas. And this has been used for many years. So the most recent project then had these streets identified. And sometimes what we would do is that if there was a street in really bad condition in the prior 2 areas, we may pick it up in the next area just because it's in a failed condition. And so we go through and identify all those all those streets that are in desperate need. So this year we had the most money ever allocated to a project. And so the 2 areas actually are a little more restrictive for following that pattern. And that's what we realized was going to happen. And that's why we're working on a new approach to this. But kind of walking through the construction. So the design is not too bad. We'll end up with a set of plans about like this. And we'll end up with some specifications about this thick. So on the paving projects, it's not a huge contract document. If you had a building project, it would be thick. But construction is definitely the bulk of the money spending and a lot of the coordination and work. And so we wanted to walk through what the process is for a paving project. So in the areas where the streets are going to be paved, the residents and businesses are all notified. They're posted for signs. We also have to put inlet protection or BMPs for water quality. And then we go around and we do a lot of concrete work. So people don't realize this, but it is actually a trigger that we have to do ADA compliance and improvements in alignment with our resurfacing contracts. So we'll go through and do sidewalk repairs, driveway alterations, as well as ADA curb ramp upgrades. So although you don't see the paving going on, this is part of the project, and we've tried it 2 ways where we've had the concrete portion separated out. It actually worked pretty well. We may go back to that model, or it's combined. But what happens is that it's usually an AC prime, an asphalt prime, and they sub out the concrete work. That all has to get done up ahead of time. So here's an example. We have to close lanes, close sidewalks during that work. And here's an example where you have cross gutters that may also be required. So people don't necessarily think about that, but in order to keep our water flowing during rain events, you keep those in good condition, and there can be a lot of traffic control. So this area was over by Warner Brothers, so there was a ton of coordination and activity because they always have events going on. So when we restrict traffic down to this, it gets very exciting. Here's an example of a before and after. So you can see that there has been, the curb ramp has actually been widened, and we've put in the truncated domes. And then here's an example where there was a lot of upheaval on the sidewalk from the roots of a tree, and that can cause a tripping hazard. So we go in and do all of those repairs. And then sometimes you find some like mystery water lines and that type of thing when you're digging in there. And so you deal with that as you go. We also coordinate with all the utilities, including Burbank Water and Power, and then all the franchise companies. So sometimes a street may get delayed in the paving because we're waiting for somebody else to tear it up, because we don't want somebody to go in and tear up a freshly paved street. And sometimes they come out of the woodworks when they find out that we're going to be paving in an area. Like, wait, we want to go do that, our improvements first before you do that. So there is a lot of coordination that goes on. But this is an example where also BWP put in new utility boxes. So we work with them on that process. And then here's an example of where you're cold milling, or you're grinding the street out to get a good connection and getting enough pavement thickness because that's a primary area of the travelway as well as the degradation. So you do this grinding operation, you have dust control in place, and sweeping that goes on, and all the streets are posted. Nobody's supposed to be parking there. And then we start the paving operation. And then if your street had speed humps, then we had to remove those and then reinstall them. And that's what it looks like after that's been done. And then we've got to lay it out for the striping. So then that happens, and we install traffic loops at the intersections. We do the striping, we're doing the continental crosswalks, and then put in all the signage for the stop sign, for the stop and limit lines, and bike paths.
Just to clarify, does the city of Burbank, do we do our own striping?
Yeah,
In-house.
we do both.
We have a contractor and we do.
We do.
Okay.
You have to bring all of the utility covers up to grade, so that does not feel like a pothole when you're driving on it. And then ultimately you get to a finished and freshly paved street. So that is an example. And then the following year for this one, for paving, so we have that in a programmatic capital category. It's actually probably one of our larger capital projects, but it's a similar thing every single year. So we know that it needs to be done every single year. Any
Thank you.
questions?
Yes, we do. Mr. Jackson.
Just a question. A year or two ago, a number of the ADA cuts at the corners in my area were taken out and replaced with ADA curb cuts. Why did we go through that exercise? Was the
Every time-
standards changed, or?
Every time the feds change a standard and you go in and trigger it, you've got to upgrade it to current standards. So there's no limitation. If it's a year old and the standards changed, you have to tear it out and replace it.
And there's no federal
There's no
subsidies?
grandfathering. Nope.
All right. Thank you.
It's an observation I think a lot of us have seen, something I just got put in a couple of years before, and then it gets replaced again. Do we have any other questions? Ms. Takahashi?
Thank you for this presentation. A couple questions. The first one's about the slide about planning when you discussed the P3 options for getting funding, or I mean not funding, but getting the project going. So I understand the bidding process, and the P3 process is a little bit newer.
Yes.
So also, from what I understand, is that generally P3s tend to be projects that are ongoing. They're larger, an ongoing relationship with whoever you're having the P3 project doing with.
Yes.
So is there possibly we could discuss that a little bit further or get some more information on that, or, you know what I mean? So
Yes, we're very green on this too. So when that time comes, we certainly would present it to you. But in general, there are a few different P3 models, but in essence, the city would have, or the agency would have something that would be beneficial to, say, a developer, where they can utilize perhaps a piece of land, but they have an opportunity to make a profit off of it, and then they operate and maintain it for a certain number of years, and that's all agreed to under a financial agreement with the agency. And then those terms and conditions can either be renewed or renegotiated, or gets turned back over to the agency. So, and that it comes in a variety of different forms, but you may have, for example, a toll road. So you could have a toll road that would be constructed, and then that private entity would own and operate it, and agreed upon rates would be charged. But then the agency is still paying a fee for that. And then you just make a determination if that a cost benefit analysis if that works for you. The other one that we did go and tour was the Long Beach Civic Center. So that became a 3-piece moving part where the courthouse moved to a new location on city property. They built that as a P3, and then a developer came in and redid did a new civic center, a new library, but there's space on that property for the developer to also construct housing. And so they will have that profit, that ability to make the profit on, and they're utilizing, they get prime real estate. So those are kind of the types of scenarios that may play out.
So how would that, when it comes to the bidding process or the decision-making process of how that gets funded, how is that been established, or would that go through council, or how would that work?
It definitely would go to council.
Yeah.
Just even entering into that process would be something new, but it would be something that you're looking at terms and conditions. And so you usually have a financial entity that you're partnering. You might also have somebody representing the city that is helping through that. There's a lot of legal aspect to it. And so it basically comes down to those terms and conditions of if that's going to be a reasonable and good deal for the agency.
Okay. Do we have any yet in Burbank that are P3 relationships? No.
Not.
Okay. And do we have anything that, you mentioned the Central Library, is there anything else that tentatively is being considered for that? Is it the Civic Center, one of those?
Not to my knowledge. No.
Okay. And then just a couple more smaller questions. So
it is interesting that you say, do we have any P3s? So it is kind of it's a newer term. So I think there are components of it. There are things that are similar to P3s. Turnkey was a type of project that was utilized probably a good 20 years ago. That was really common for like a wastewater treatment plant where a company would come in and they would operate it, maintain it for X number of years, and if the agency was up and running to take it over, they would, but they didn't have that skill set. Some people would say that you might have like a parking garage would be a type of a P3, although it's not exactly the same methodology. So this is a little bit of a newer approach.
okay. You know, one of the reasons why I asked is because it's being brought up regularly as if it's something that's
It's a big thing.
right.
Yeah.
So okay. And then when it comes to you mentioned on one of the original slides, I forget which one. There it is. This one. That it can take years to do planning. It can take years before you actually get into the design and construction of a project. So if it takes that long to get planned or designed, at what point does it get budgeted? And when do you know to budget a project?
Well, that's
Is it
typically
triggered or
that's typically the reason why it stays in planning.
not budgeted?
Because there is no funding. So, but the concept, or there might not be any real estate. I mean, there could be a number of reasons for that. But it might get a little bit of money. It might not be palatable at the time. There are a number of reasons that it could stay in that phase for a long time. It may be under legal challenges. There could be a variety of reasons.
Okay.
But and sometimes it doesn't take really any time at all. So our paving projects, we know what that process is going to be. So the quote unquote planning phase is pretty minimal.
Okay. And sorry, my very last question is, with the paving project planning that you have here, is this available to the public to look at this?
Yes, and we post that actually, and the list that is the contracts on that we just finished with. That's all posted online.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Takahashi. Any other questions? I love the way it's called P3, public-private partnerships. Whenever we get into these acronyms, you lose me. By the way, I think the community services building was a design and build
That's
project.
right. It was a design build. You are correct.
Maybe the Bell Golf Course Clubhouse may have also been a
Okay.
design build.
Where is it
We
saying
have a
yes?
few here. I know these are before your time, but we did have them.
Okay, so maybe we haven't done one in a long time.
That's true, by the way. That is probably true. All right. Well, thank you for providing us with this information. If there are no further questions on this, I guess your recommendation is that we note and file this, receive and file, rather not note and file. Thank you.
Okay.
That leads us to the next item on the agenda, which is the status of funded projects, if I'm correct.
Yes, it is. Let me have that one. Okay, ready for the presentation. All right, so this is our third meeting, and per the code, we are required to bring you a status update. So we're going to go through, I believe you are all at least sent a link, some of you have hard copies of the capital improvement program budget. And we'll go through our currently open projects list. We'll talk about the status in terms of time, as well as budget and money. So in your budget book, I took the next two slides are just a page, and I did not write down what the page number was on that, but it's this is our paving contract, and it's just a quick example of how complicated a project can be on the funding side. So these are all, you can see there are 2, 4, 6 account numbers on this project. And if you go to the middle of the page, it lists out the current year, prior year accumulated totals, and then future anticipated funding amounts in all of those different categories. So when we are running this project, money's coming out of all of these different accounts, and we have to track that and report out on it because some of those funds have restrictions on them. So any type of a grant fund would have the same. So this project lines up with, I'll go back to that first page. If you look at that last number, the P22367, if you go then to Exhibit A, this would be listed as project number 40. So that's how you can correlate the open projects list to the CIP budget. And Exhibit A totals out all of the currently open projects, and we generally broke them down into planning, design, and construction. So in the planning phase, we have 31 projects. Design, we have 20. In construction, we have 33 for a total of 84 projects. And then looking at each category in planning, we are approximately 71% on schedule for the total bailiwick, design 75%, and construction 94%. And here's just another visual comparison of the amount or the percentage roughly that is on schedule and those that are not. And we are new at this, so we are ironing some things out and trying to also present this information to you to see if it's clear enough and valuable enough with you, so for you to understand what it is that we're doing. So then if you just did it all collectively, we're 81% on schedule. And then looking at the funding expenditures, again, by those three categories. So we changed over our financial accounting system this fiscal year. So what we have here is the total dollar amount, and that's what you'll see also in Exhibit A, of a project that has had funding in it since its inception. So that's not just this fiscal year. So that's the money that's accumulated in that project since it began. And then the amount expended is the dollar amount expended since it began. And so you'll see our total amount for those 84 projects is roughly $89 million budgeted and almost $30 million expended. And here's a visual on that same dollar amount. And then if you look at it in totality, we have expended approximately 33.7% of the budgeted amount for those projects.
Okay. Thank you again for that presentation. Do we have any questions, Ms. Rochelle?
A quick question about Exhibit A.
Uh-huh.
And maybe I missed something. For 78 and 82, is 0% complete, but yet we see charges against a project. Am I missing something?
I'm sorry, what numbers were you looking
Okay, so
at?
look at 78 and 82. So it looks like 0%, but there's already charges out of the project.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
Vanessa,
no.
can you use the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that's the percent complete of the current phase.
Okay.
So that means that project is in construction. We just had, on the Burbank Channel Bikeway, we just had the groundbreaking ceremony yesterday. So
So we
you're looking at, so there's $8.8 million budgeted for that project.
Right.
To date, we've expended almost $600,000. So the rest of it's going to be used for construction.
So the 0% is,
Is the percent complete of that current phase?
thank you.
Sure.
I misunderstood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rochelle. Mr. Jackson?
I have a few questions also related to Exhibit A. That one, which was just brought up, was one that I wondered. Now I understand you're saying that's the phase. So the 600,000 went to planning and design. Okay.
Correct.
Looking up a little bit earlier in the budget projects, items 61, 63, 64, we're at 90% done of construction, 98%, 100%. And the dollar amounts expended, however, are less than half of what was budgeted. Were we really efficient?
So that's an excellent question.
wish.
So here's part of our challenge. So one of the things I would like to propose I'll back up a little bit. When we started to put these numbers together, in my brain, I say, okay, we owe you information on the first quarter of this year. So that should be through September. However, our books don't close in time for us to turn around a report. So it would be more meaningful in January when we come for the next report to give you a full report on the first quarter expenditures. And then the next quarter we would give you on the first half of the year. Then we would go 3 quarters. And then in October, we could give you the whole picture of the prior year. So what happens is, even though the books are closed, the contractor might not have invoiced for us for it. So you'll see that expenditure then hit because they spent the money. So time and money won't exactly line up because we're waiting for invoices.
One other, item 78 and 81 are related to, no, excuse me, 77, which is Empire Interchange Water, Empire Interchange Electric, and we're spending a couple $1 million, $1.5 million. That was all on the city's dime, nothing that was recoverable from Caltrans. I mean, we wouldn't have done that if they hadn't reconfigured the freeway.
Mr. Kriske is here to answer that
Yeah.
question, but I think part of that was agreement, and then also it's the source of the funding that's utilized for this. And hold that thought because I also want to talk to you about outliers, but I'll let David answer that question for you.
I do.
Good evening, members of the board. David Kriske with the Community Development Department. In the case of the Empire Interchange, a lot of the city's direct costs in the utility relocation was reimbursable by Caltrans. So the accounts that you see that talk about water line and electrical relocations were relocated at Caltrans expense at 100% in virtually every case. Luckily, our utilities were there before the freeway was, and that's usually why they say if you were there first, we pay to relocate you. So that's true. The overall main Empire Interchange project that you see for about, I think, $5 or $6 million, that does represent mostly a city cost to develop the project, but that's a city cost that we've been incurring since the project's been in the planning phase. And in this case, the planning phase for Empire Interchange has been since the 1990s. And so that's a roll up for almost 20 years or more of city costs toward what became basically a $300 million project. So in that one category, it's probably mostly not reimbursable costs, but in the utility side, it has mostly been reimbursed.
Thank you, Mr. Kriske.
And I do think it's interesting. It's taken Caltrans about 26 years to widen the freeway. It took 18 months to build the Empire State Building and about 4 years to do the Hoover Dam. But we went to the moon in 8.5.
I'd like to see the EIR for that one. Yes.
So, so that actually is a great example, and one that so when we were running this, collecting this data and running the report and looking at how do we capture this information, one of the things that I'd like to do for the next report is also identify those projects that are outliers, because we have no control over the schedule when it's a Caltrans project. But we counted it, we lumped it in with everything, and so we're looking at how do we capture that information. One of the areas that we are working on getting better at is creating project charters, and so that's something we've identified that would be very beneficial, but we're just not well versed at it yet. And so under a project charter, once you have a agreed upon scope of work, budget and schedule, then you sign off on that charter. And then if there are any delays to that, so if it's like Public Works delivering the project for the design and construction and it gets delayed, then and that's something within our control, then we own that. If there's a scope change that occurs or unforeseen conditions that occur, then that would be captured in a charter amendment, and you would re-baseline your schedule and your budget accordingly. So those are processes that again, it's pretty new to us, and we're going to be working on that to help better capture the body of work and its status.
Go ahead, Mr. Brennan.
Other than Caltrans, is there anybody else that would be an outlier on your projects?
So we do get some interesting ones that impact other things. Right now, LADWP is doing their river supply conduit tunneling project, and although they're launching from Johnny Carson Park, they still have some activities in the right-of-way that then can cause delays for other types of projects. And one example is that we had Riverside on the list to pave forever and a day, and because they kept saying they were coming. And so we didn't pave it because we thought they were going to be there, and they're going to be running a ton of trucks when they start that tunneling operation in full swing. And so we didn't pave it, and so we were waiting for them. And then under this agreement, we did ask them to do some interim measures to keep the street in decent condition, and then we'll take care of it after they're done. And the other one is development. So we don't control those schedules either. They may drive projects, though.
Yes, Mr. Jackson.
One more sort of basic question. These 84 projects that are in various stages, to get on that list of the 84, I assume you, staff, brought them forward to council as items that needed improvements, intentions, and then possibly council also brought some to you. So that's how it got, and that's then reflected in the budget.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes.
All right, thank you.
And we get to be the monkey wrench here that gets into the middle of that process, starting now as we sit through this process. So we'll have an opportunity to hopefully give our opinion, and that's coming up as well. Ms. Gibson, just for my colleagues who may not have yet started to read that capital improvement program adopted budget, a lot of what's there includes the water and power
Yes.
and enterprise fund
Good
projects. So I did not read that at all, although I perused through it. It's kind of interesting just to see because they represent, millions and millions and millions.
Yes, they do.
They're the rich uncle.
Yeah.
We all contribute to the rich uncle's pockets, but they're the rich uncle. It's just interesting. So when you look at that book, it appears to be huge, but in reality, what we need to understand, I think, and dive into and read several times is a lot less. It's not nearly as
Correct.
daunting as it looks.
Sewer and refuse are also in there too, and not under the purview of the IOB on the money side of it, but we also just want to make sure that you understand it's part of our work, and that it can impact things predominantly more like paving. So, and BWP's work can also. So we may delay paving in an area until they come through and finish their work, and then we'll follow on.
Okay. I have a quick observation with respect to the status of how far we are. Are we on schedule or behind in projects, whether it's in the planning or in the construction? The construction ones appear to be mostly on time. Only a small portion of them are behind schedule. Is it correct to assume that planning certainly can be all over the map on schedule because of, as you say, there are 100 reasons why planning is planning. You're just beginning to scratch the surface to see what comes up.
Right.
So I don't know how relevant that is when you look at the total projects on schedule. To me, that didn't seem to be as relevant as the chart where you actually show that the construction projects we have are 94% on schedule, which I think is what we, as a board, probably should focus. And
Yes.
I mean, the design I understand too, by the way, because then we are also investing money, and that has a much more finite time frame. And those are 25% out of schedule, or 25% of the projects in the design phase are out of schedule. That was probably the one that I thought, I wonder why we're off in those done architects.
Right, and there can be a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because the construction funding hasn't presented itself, so it's stalled out in design,
Got it.
and that can be something too. So it's not a simple like direct yes or no matrix on this body of work. So those are some of the things that we're trying to explain through this process, because it does get quite complicated, and then ways to categorize it and have it make sense to you if we're staying generally on time and within budget.
Thank you, Ms. Gibson. Are there any other questions on this presentation of the status of the funded projects? If we don't have any, then we will receive the report and file it as suggested by staff, and very, very good information that will help us be a little better prepared to do our job.
And we'll keep on working on improving it too, because it's this is new to us too. So we're a little rough around the edges, and just trying to figure out what is the most meaningful methodology for that makes sense to all of you. One other note, and this was so the Measure P funding was not approved until this year's budget. So it's new money, but most of the projects existed, so it's additional money in existing projects. This was a very manual effort, and I had one of our analysts run through it, but she has about, so there's a total of roughly $16 million in the Measure P funds, and the general fund amount, and there must be some other dollar amount in there, but she gave me a rough number of about $288,000 has been spent up to September 27th. And so that's another thing you're going to see. Your cash flow expenditure, and we don't do cash flows yet, but it's not a straight line. It's not an equal distribution month to month to month throughout the course of the year. So that S curve that I showed you, it will more readily follow your expenditure rate. When you hit that construction, you're going to start eating into that money really fast into your budgeted amount. But during the course of design, it may be over a couple of years. So these are some of the things that we are talking about of how are we budgeting for projects and looking at new ways to approach that. So we're only utilizing the cash that's needed for that year rather than sitting on like an entire project's budget for a few years and just waiting until we get to construction to draw it down. So that's something that we are looking at more closely and budgeting accordingly. And the other trend you typically see is that a capital project does not fit cleanly into a budget year, a fiscal year. So it oftentimes, it may start at the end of the fiscal year, it may start in the middle, but rarely does it begin and end within a fiscal year. And so you get kind of these wacky reads on it. And those are some of the other things that you see trending typically. When we go into the new fiscal year, the first quarter is pretty flat on expenditures. You start picking up in the second quarter, but you hit a lot of holidays. Third quarter, you start cranking up, and then fourth quarter, you're spending like mad. And then it will taper off oftentimes. But that's another thing that we're going to be doing is tracking and trending that as we go through this so that you can see it. And then the thought is in next October, you would have a full view of what we did this current fiscal year to look at then the following fiscal year. So we'll be lagging every time, but we'll be gathering data and trends as we move through it so we can get better at the forecasting the needs and the amount of money that we need. So this year we did an educated guess on programmatic capital needs amounts, and now we'll see if we were on target on that, if we had a good estimate and how we move that forward every year.
I know Ms. Jackson has a question. Let me say something before I forget it. Sorry, Greg, I'm getting old. So if someone asks, we are using Measure P funds. We are in this fiscal year of 2019-2020. We have approximately $16 million. So far, we've only spent $288,000 through the end of September.
So that's also that $4.7 million of general fund money, right?
Right. So in essence, we're just beginning to spend that money, but we have committed to the full expenditure of the $16 million by way of this list of projects.
Correct. So there's been a lot of effort in putting together contracts in the first quarter. So you won't see that work activity happening until later. And then you'll get the activity and the invoicing following that. So it's not at all surprising that we have very minimal expenditures on that fund source.
But for the average homeowner here or property owner in Burbank, business owner, we are seeing additional paving efforts and et cetera. Are we correct in saying to someone, well, this is your Measure P dollars at work?
So
or not really?
Yes. Well, we're getting there, right? It's not Measure P just yet, but that's what we will be working towards. So our typical process on a paving project, you start in the fiscal year, we do a little bit of planning, we do the designing, we advertise it, and then towards late spring, early summer, that's when the construction actually happens. So for example, like this year, it lagged a little bit and we went July, August, September, and then the contractor actually finished early. So it was a quick contract. But that's what you'll see is that you have to have all that money encumbered or, included, into the project when you advertise and award it, because you're now entering into a contract and obligating the city to pay that dollar amount. So the money will be expended. It might not necessarily be, encumbered. It won't necessarily be expended. It depends on the invoicing from the contractor.
Would we be correct again for us to speak to our neighbors and members of the community to say that we anticipate even more paving improvements and paving updates, et cetera, than we've had in the past? Because, again, we're paying 0.75% more in sales tax.
Absolutely correct. So we just got done with the largest paving contract ever, and the next one's bigger.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify what it is you say to your neighbors, because that's our job also.
Well, and you bring up another good point. One of the things we're also considering is how do we advertise that out there? And so it's a little difficult with a paving project because you'd put up a sign and you take it down, in a day. But maybe we could put it on the no parking signs. Maybe we could put it on the door hanger. So we are thinking about how do we get that messaging out.
Yes, and as long as it's not like what happened to Mr. Jackson, your alley's going to be repaved. Hang in there. It's already 15 years. Sorry.
Simple letter to the editor. Tell me
Well,
what's going to happen.
I don't talk to my neighbors, so it's not an issue for me. This is a slightly off topic, but it's
Grinch.
what we've been discussing in general. They're working on the Burbank Bridge, and 2 of the off-ramps are now gone. I've noticed since that I would normally use Burbank to access I-5, that traffic is going elsewhere. And there's some problems. The on-ramp on, I think, what would it be, Front Street, wasn't designed to accommodate all the traffic which is now having to flow. Is Mr. Christie monitoring this and recommending, at this point, I think the only thing that you can do is probably some striping. Maybe a left turn arrow at San Fernando Road. I've noticed a queue going that direction that's 8-10 cars and takes 2 or 3 cycles. Anyway, your comments on that?
Yes, so the short answer is yes, and the actual folks doing the real work is under Mr. Yee's shop in our traffic management center. Caltrans tells us, we see it anecdotally, but I'll say if you want to talk about something to tell your friends and neighbors, tell them to use Empire because it's wide open right now, and that's what we're trying to direct everybody to. You have full access. So go there. But yes, we're going to have issues at Front Street at Verdugo. It's going to get a little worse when the bridge itself closes and the traffic will distribute to other areas. Also, quite frankly, we had some suggestions to Caltrans about signing the new interchange on the mainline freeway. They have implemented some of that, but there's still some signage that we think could be modified so that folks realize that the interchange is open. I think people are still getting used to that. And I think longtime Burbankers' mental map of the street system needs to adjust to this new connection. But please tell everybody to use Empire. That's what it's there for. We're directing everybody to the new interchange as Burbank Boulevard has work done to it.
Just going south to go to downtown, it seems counterintuitive to go to Empire. But yeah, the Empire interchange is impressive. And I was very impressed with the artwork and we got something rather than the standard that Caltrans gives most jurisdictions. Okay, thank you very much.
And Mr. Kriske, please let Caltrans know that the little small sign that says close on the Burbank off-ramp coming up as you're driving south is really minimal. They've just added the Empire name, et cetera, on the most immediate signs, but going back a couple of miles, you have no idea what's coming unless you know you're going to not be able to get off at Burbank. I was on the freeway today, and I was following someone who clearly wanted to exit at the Burbank Boulevard off-ramp, and they stopped on the brakes, and they're hesitant only to find out there is no exit. So they could probably do a little better with the upfront notices maybe a few miles back. Thank you. Ms. Gibson, sorry, this is our rant. Sorry. All right. If we're done with this portion, I guess please lead us into the next future agenda items, suggestions and recommendations, and see if the board has any additional comments or thoughts.
So we for the next agenda, we were looking at preparing the proposed pavement management program. I don't know exactly where we'll be at. We're working with a consultant right now to develop that, but whatever we have at that point, we can bring that forward, and then that'll give you a comparison of what we currently have. We'll go into some more details on that. So that would be our recommendation for the December meeting.
Okay. And, I'm sorry, Ms. Takahashi.
One last comment. I wanted to point out that you have a lot of really important projects on this list that a lot of them are near completion. And I don't think that the public maybe knows that a lot of this is happening. I think it would be really great to have periodically maybe some updates on things that you have completed recently.
Okay.
That we can then see what the money is being used for and people can actually see it visibly. I think that would be helpful. And maybe something that's being close to completion or in the works might also be helpful too.
Okay, how about we call it spotlight updates?
Yeah.
All right.
Good.
Mr. Brennan?
I hate to say it, but prior to the meeting tonight, I had about a dozen questions for you.
Okay.
You answered them all.
Whoa.
So thank you very much.
You're
A
welcome.
recommendation would be, I'm trying to think about how would you publish or advertise of all the different projects that you're doing, considering your budget, how large it is, and how much you're completing so far. Maybe an advertisement in the Burbank Leader? I don't know.
We've talked about getting better at that too.
I mean, seriously, that would probably be a good idea.
Yes, it's a great idea, and so we'll give some consideration into how we do that. If we gave you like a year in review, we could cover all the projects that completed construction too, which I think would be it's helpful. Oh, and I agree, we don't talk about it enough.
Yes.
I'd like to add that the city is doing a really great job this past year, especially of posting on social media the different projects that have been going on, like yesterday's opening of the new bike path construction. Was that yesterday?
Yes, our PIO department is like going by leaps and bounds. They're doing
Yes.
amazing stuff. And we've gotten a lot of feedback too on that front that we aren't communicating. So the busier we get we get out there, the more complicated it gets, right? It's we need to do space planning out there too, because you can't have a detour to a detour to a detour to a detour. And as we do more and more work, that's going to become more critical. So we do have a coordination effort that we utilize, and we're going to be requiring some more things like from the franchises and that type of thing. 'Cause sometimes they pop up and we don't know. We get a call and we go out there like, oh, you're not supposed to be out here right now. But notification to the businesses and the residents, because that's not very good right now.
Yes. By the way, I'm going to echo what you said because my wife told me today as I'm driving along. She says, I see on Facebook the channel bike thing is starting. They just had a grand opening. So we always think that we do a great job at communicating, but I think even when we're doing a great job, we still are not. Think of
You
the
can't
recent
over communicate, right?
No, there is a recent Coca-Cola advertisers. And it's not
Right.
like we don't know what a Coke is, but they continue to advertise simply because you have to let everybody know and you assume that they do not know. And we certainly, with so much going on, and by the way, so much more. I mean, we remember
Yes.
our task is that there's still a whole, whether it's 470 million or whatever it is, because we don't know what it is of additional projects that
Right.
yet need to be funded. That's really going to be our task, is to figure out how do we use our 16 million, leverage it, as you explained to us, growing over time to reach that number. And here we had the pitch from the library board trustee reminding us that they want to be kept in the front of their of the line here, so which is cute and nice, and important. But at the end of the day, everybody finds their project is the most important project.
Right.
Sorry. Thank you. Anything else we should be asking about the future agenda items, Mr. Jackson?
Yeah, I have a question. 9A, which is governance training. You're trying to schedule a 2-hour meeting for us, I guess, next month. Before we could sit up here, we had to take an hour online. It took me about an hour and a quarter. Ethics quiz. I didn't miss any questions. The first meeting we had, about half of that meeting was devoted with the city attorney explaining the Brown Act. Next week, the city clerk is hosting a 2-hour charrette on ethics, which I think is mandated or at least requested by the council for all the different boards. Who decided we needed another 2 hours of ethics training?
So this is a request that we've had from actually multiple boards and commissions in the past that they feel like there could be more in how you run a meeting, and I know we are fortunate to have somebody who is very familiar with that. But this group, we didn't know exactly what the makeup was going to be, and this is the group that was identified because it's a brand new board. To kind of be the pilot for that training, and it's something new and different. So we wanted to try it out. The recommendation was to start with the Infrastructure Oversight Board.
And just to
Well-
piggyback on that really quickly, it's not going to be a full-on ethics training. You may hear some refreshers on Brown Act pointers and tips and a few ethics pointers and tips, but we are bringing in outside counsel to help lead this training, and so it's really going to be more practice skills. We have been very, very fortunate with the sort of level of experience that this board has had, and so I understand.
the
I
Brown
certainly
Act-
understand what you're saying.
Yeah, the Brown Act has basically 2 points. One, we shouldn't discuss anything outside of this room substantively, and the other point being the public must be able to comment on things before we act. That's essentially the Brown Act, and the state's ethics laws essentially, don't vote, don't participate in anything which you might have any financial interest. So, that's what it boils down to. There may be hundreds of pages, but, I think in 67 years I've developed a fair moral, standard for myself. And, we're living in an era where the resident of the White House has absolutely no morals. So, I'm a little bit offended by this, but, I'll try to be a good sport and be there if my schedule permits.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other personal thoughts on that? The issue of establishing priorities, when is that coming? Or am I missing that as in terms of what's
Yeah, that's not ready yet.
not ready? Okay, thank you, because that is our task,
It-
or one of our tasks.
It's one of them, yes.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, we need to develop a policy.
All right. Well, Ms. Gibson, thank you very much for a very clear presentation. Your hearing was not an issue. Ours was probably. But thank you. And thank you to staff for being here tonight. My gosh, there's so many wonderful people that give their time this
We
late
wanted to
in the
make sure we
evening.
could answer any questions regarding projects too.
Thank you. I think that gets us to the end, unless any other board members have any comments. We stand adjourned then to our next meeting, which is an odd date, is December 11, 6 p.m. here at City Hall, because we don't have a November meeting, and combining the November and December meeting to December 11th.
That's correct.
Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you.